somebody on the plane sitting next to me said, "What are you doing here?" "Oh, I know what you're doing here. 3 Mile Island, right?" I said, "I can't tell you, or I'll have to kill you." Well, it was a wonderful family show and a wonderful kids show, but it was a great horse, too. What's the picture that Redford made? Horse Whisperer. Well, this was a great horse, but behind every great horse is a great man who trains him and owns him, and that was a man named Ralph McCutcheon, who trained and loved that horse. And it was a marvelous thing to behold, because he would do anything just by voice command from Ralph, and they were pals. And sometimes the horse would come to work in the morning, even as you and I, not feeling like working, you know? So Ralph would say, "Beauty," Beauty was the horse's real name, and he'd say, "Go over and pick that up." And the horse would go, "Nothing." And then he'd say, "You get over and do that." And the horse would look at him and kind of fold his arms and challenge him, you know? And then Ralph would say, "Okay, everybody, sit down, cover the camera. I got to do this now, or we may never do it again." So he would cajole and try to persuade this horse to do whatever it was, and sooner or later, he would do that, and the horse was simply incredible. And then he'd feed him a lot of carrots, and the horse would smile and be great. And if you went that night to Ralph McCutcheon's house to have a drink, he'd invite the horse in. And the horse, this is a big black stallion, would walk through the house, not touching a thing, spilling a drink, nothing, and nod at everybody and have a great time and go out the other side. Well, you asked me what made it a great show. That's part of it, but it was pure family entertainment, and still it plays many places in the world. I was in Germany a few years ago, and it was playing black and white half hours, 7 o'clock at night on German television, 5 nights a week. Oh yeah, that was the day of the loner, the man who faced the world by himself, and by golly, won out, you know. And my, there were a lot of them, weren't there? We used to shoot the exteriors for Fury out at a motion picture ranch called Iverson's Ranch, that is now a housing development, and it was wonderful because they had many different roads and piles of rock and various scenery things that you could use for your picture. But on any given day, there might be half a dozen Western companies shooting on that. And you'd be getting ready for a shot and lining up or trying to rehearse or something, and here comes Dick Boone with a posse riding through your shot, you know, and there's my brother, Jim Arness, over there. And so those were great days. A lot of work. Well, we wanted to go to Australia to do it, to get a different look or slant on television westerns. By that time, there were so many playing here that a really fresh idea was hard to come by. And these people came to me, and the same people who owned Fury, and said, "Hey, do you want to do that?" And I thought, yeah, it'd be a great idea, because we're going down to a foreign country where they don't do 6-gun drawing so much, and they do a lot of stuff with whips, and they cut cattle, you know, out of the herd with whips and a little flick here and there. So it was a whole different thing, and I hoped that it would catch on here. It did okay here. It did marvelously around the rest of the world. But I don't know, it just didn't make it here for some reason. And And part of it was because Australia was not ready to produce a television series, a weekly series. They didn't have a big talent pool, particularly of men who were tall and strong. You think of Australians as being that way, but a generation ago they weren't necessarily, and they weren't outdoor types that you need for Westerns. So the talent pool at that time was it was quite small to do a television series. Now I've been back to Australia many times since and have a lot of friends there, and I don't want them to misunderstand me. I love you all, and you have some of the greatest actors in the world, but at that time there was not a big enough talent pool. Well, yeah, sure. If you think of something like the Kangaroos take over the ranch or something, you know. Well, we tried to bust that myth, but we had an awful lot of sheep over there, my goodness. But actually, the countryside in New South Wales at that time looked very much as Thousand Oaks did in 1960. So we could have done them here in that sense. But it was a great year and a half in Australia, and I wouldn't have missed it. I didn't have any idea at that time, except that I knew he was a very good writer, and he and I became good friends over that. And gee, there were a bunch of others. I'm not sure whether Rod Serling didn't write one or two of those. A great guy named Don Ingalls. Yes, we used a number of American writers in the beginning because we didn't know where the Australian writers were. And so we had to do that. And it was only, a couple of years after we got back from that Roddenberry came with a thing called Star Trek. Yeah, amazing. Number one, I'd say it'd be Big Jim himself. Matt Dillon was a great character, and Jim is a great character, and he played it as a wonderful human being who would go to nearly any length to accomplish a feat and break up an impossible situation before drawing a gun, and do it with humanity and humility, if you will. And that he was a great part of it. The other were the writers and the producers who understood that this was not to be a weekly shoot 'em up, bang bang thing. They wanted to do stories about people and problems in the Old West, and did it well for 20 years. Not a bad gig. He had been wounded quite badly in World War II at the Battle of Anzio, and through all the years of Gunsmoke, you may have noticed a slight limp with Jim. But when he got out of the Army and he had spent a year and a half in a military hospital trying to beat the infection of osteomyelitis, and he's tried to go back to school at Minnesota and didn't appeal to him, and he went to California on a lark with another good friend, and they became beach bums, sort of. He learned to surf, and he loved surfing, has loved it all of his life, and then got interested in theater a bit and joined a little theater. There was a place right here in Beverly Hills called the Bliss Hayden Theater. And he got a part in a play there and was seen almost immediately by a man named Doré Sherry, who at that time was the head of MGM or RKO or something, that's right. And he put Jim into a picture called The Farmer's Daughter with Loretta Young, for which she won the Academy Award that year. And he was off and running. That didn't last right then. I mean, when I finally came a couple of years later, he met me at the train, at the downtown L.A. train station. And he said, "What are you doing here? This is things are terrible. You know, you ought to go back and do some more study in Minnesota or something, be a pharmacist. And I said, no, I'm here. And he said, well, okay, then the newsstand over there, you can buy a thing called The Hollywood Reporter. Read it and good luck. And so that's the way we started here. But he was quite right. It was a very tough time here. Motion pictures were in flux because what they call the consent decree had come down, issued by the government, which said that the big studios must divest themselves of their theater chains. Big blow, you know. And so that was costing them a lot. They were all in trouble monetarily. And this little thing called television, nobody knew yet what the heck it was. And it was still an infant. It wasn't the monster that it's become, you know. But people of motion pictures were very wary about it. And I remember all of us young guys at that time, Jim, certainly myself, you can do Hugh O'Brien and Gene Barry and Rory Calhoun and all of the guys who played Westerns, television series, and they were all very concerned that that being in a television show was going to kill them from motion pictures. And I had that told to me by Otto Preminger. I did a picture with him called The Court Martial of Billy Mitchell with Gary Cooper. And I asked Otto one day about television. I said I had been offered a television series, and he sort of sneered at me, as he was given to do now and then, and said, well, yeah, okay, go ahead and do that. You're through in pictures. You know that. Well, another guy said that. I did a film called A Night of the Hunter, a classic, only thing that Charles Lawton ever directed. Mitchum and Shelley Winters, and become a classic picture. The producer, Paul Gregory, was a good friend, and I felt a brilliant producer. And I mentioned television and to him, and he said, okay, but you're through in pictures. Well, we weren't through in pictures. I mean, the celluloid runs through the camera, whatever you do. But the picture business was in hardship for quite a few years there during the 50s. And television was just beginning to burgeon. And my goodness, what happened to it? Yeah. Well, yeah, some of them were true horror. You know, I've watched a couple of them lately, but there was a huge audience for them. They liked to see grasshoppers climbing up Chicago and strange creatures taking over the world. And man, if they said that in 70 minutes I could beat them all, I was for that. And it was a way to pay the rent and buy the groceries. You shot these things in a week, maybe 10 days if you were lucky. But it was a fantastic training ground for actors in film, and everybody did it and learned to love it. First, you become invited to do that show because they think you're a good actor and will add something to their show. Yeah, I did a number of those things, and they were all fun, and they were all kind of good parts, and gave a chance to a young actor to show different sides of yourself and your character and your personality. Boy, I did one thing I remember called, I think it was a part of what they was called then the Reader's Digest Theater. Weekly half hours of all sorts of stories that would appear in Reader's Digest. And one of them was about a wonderful major in the war, in combat in Normandy, not long after the invasion of Europe. And he had been a school teacher who loved a certain poet and would talk to his men at night and read them poetry in the tents or the barracks or whatever, and he was shot. This was a true story of a real American hero, and he gets shot in the Battle of St. Lo and killed. And then his troops took him on a flag-draped coffin and left him on the steps of the church once the town was secured. And it was a wonderful story, and I still think one of the best things I ever did. Nobody would remember it now except his family. I'm sure that he has still some left, but it was good for the heart. It was so well done, and I have never had a better experience of the whole major cast being absolutely right for each role, and the role fitting that actor or actress as well. Yeah, they were terrific. And then Bruce Geller, the producer and creator who thought the whole thing up, was a brilliant man. And he really cared about it, and he hired people to produce and direct the show and write it who understood what he felt about this this crazy backward acrostic puzzle, you know. You really had to start from the end of an episode. I did when I read a script and said, now where do we end up in this crazy thing? And how are we going to get there? Wow, this is ingenious. And that was a great part of it. They weren't just some hack stories that were, you know, churned out. They were deep in thought. And the reason I was disappointed, perhaps, in the features that they have made since then, because they were a lot of action, bang, shoot 'em up, car crashes, bombs going off and stuff. Our method of of accomplishing impossible missions came from here first. It was a thought, and wonderfully, it was a con game. Our job was to convince our opponents to do what we wanted them to, when we wanted them to, how we wanted them to, but make them think it was their idea. That's it in a nutshell. Try writing it. It was such a beautifully mounted show. You know, I mean, for 8 years, I had the best tailor in Beverly Hills making my clothes for that show. I had that beautiful apartment. We had, among others, Barbara Bain, that beautiful, beautiful girl who was so sensational. She won 3 Best Actress Emmys in a row those first 3 years. So it was a beautifully mounted show, thoughtfully done, and I like to think well performed. The nice thing about it was that it was also an attractive enough show to view visually, so audiences, we found, would make up their own ideas as to who you were and what was going on. And I would meet people in the street, you know, walking down the street in New York or Minneapolis or wherever. A guy would stop and say, you and Cinnamon are getting it on, right? I'd say, what do you think? I don't know. And walk away. So that was a plus. As an actor, you always want more for you. I want you to show my beautiful insides and my brilliant talent and my mind. They put a rein on that. And, I mean, it was, well, Bruce's ideas were quite strict about what he wanted to see on the screen. And I remember the very first mission I did, as we conquered the villains and saw them being taken away by the police, and we passed by them, I let the slightest smile just crease one side of my face. The next day, Bruce Geller was down on the set saying, "Don't editorialize." How's that? Walk away. Do the deed. Walk away. Okay, that's done. Don't editorialize. Beautiful. Well, there was a point when he and Paramount had a falling out, and but that was later on in the history of the show. No, we were always very grateful that he was sitting up there in the office every day and well on into the evening trying to figure out the next show. Oh, well, sure, Cold War, indeed. There was that monster Russia hiding over there behind the Iron Curtain with all of its strength and power. At that time, they could have taken Europe with a phone call, you know. But we were strong and wanted to remain strong, and everybody who watched shows like ours wanted us to remain strong. And then it changed a bit once the young kids disapproved of the Vietnam War and so forth, thought we were meddling in places where we should not, and that scared the network. And they said, okay, next we got to stop going to foreign countries and doing tricks on them. We can't do that anymore. That's not nice. And so it was decreed that the next season we would only fight organized crime in the United States. And that's what we did, and that's when I felt the scripts started to lose some of their power. I was on an airplane going to Philadelphia or something, just at the time of a thing called 3 Mile Island here, where that atomic plant blew up or whatever it was. And somebody on the plane sitting next to me said, "What are you doing here?" "Oh, I know what you're doing here. 3 Mile Island, right?" I said, "I can't tell you, or I'll have to kill you." So we got a lot of fun out of that. I think everyone would hope that we could do these magic secret things and thereby save our country and the world and so forth. I guess that doesn't work too well, not only for us, but for every other country in the world. Espionage is a tough business, and no, it's and a thing of infinite interest and conjecture always, but it's the way it is. And if you can play a good spy, we had a Russian reporter on the set one time, and he said, "Why are you using always, you're not naming, but you're using Russian accent. What is this you're doing? You are teasing us, or you're aggressor or something." I said, "I don't know anything about that. That script said that we were in Ruritania. Now, the accent might be similar. I don't know." So we had fun with those things. They loved all of that stuff, and it was marvelous. And you may remember that computers were really just beginning to come in when we did that show. It seems to me that we started that show, when I started the show, to do all these quick, obtain these secrets or identities of people and so forth. We were using that IBM machine with the cards in it, you know, and then we finally graduated to the tape recorder, and that was, God, that was a lot of fun, because people always wanted to know how we did that. And they said, "Geez, the tape self-destructs and the smoke comes out of the tape and everything." I said, "That's because we didn't let you see that the prop man is down on the floor under the table with a tube and a cigarette." And then they thought that was marvelous, you know, and it was. I shouldn't be telling secrets like that. Darn. Well, we tried never to crank them out. No, it was a very difficult filmic show. And you spent a lot of time in each one watching somebody's hands doing something, stealing a diamond or unscrewing a thing and connecting a couple of wires. So we learned very early on that we had to establish a second unit crew so that we didn't have to photograph all of those things during our regular schedule of shooting the show. So we took, I think our usual schedule was 8 or 9 shooting days, a show, an hour show. So that means if we work 5 days a week, you finish one, start one on Monday, you finish it the following Wednesday, 9 days later, or 10. And then the second unit would take from perhaps 2 or 3 different shows all of those little inserts that were required and shoot them separately on a different stage and a thing really set up to do only that. And gee, we never could have made it without that. I expect that they do similar things now with CSI and some of the others. Well, they all integrated, sure. We were a pretty tight-knit bunch by that time, and we still always had Greg Morris and Peter Lupus for a long time, Marty, of course, and Barbara, but the others were chosen because Bruce or someone knew he or she would fit into this show, and it was done that way. And yes, we lived in a kind of pattern, but we tried very much to keep it from looking like a pattern, and the people who were our guests fell into that and understood what we were trying to find. Always Seducing is a lot of fun. Jeez. We did a wonderful show with Joan Collins, who was our guest one night. She was a beautiful Ruthenian princess, and it was my job to disguise as a military officer and try to win her. And we succeeded, and what our real job was to get her out of the country to safety and allow certain things to happen there that we didn't want to happen. And as we're finally taking her out of the country, and we've evaded all the hound dogs and everything else, but they find us and they shoot her and kill her, and she dies in my arms. And I had a tear in my eye that time, so that was fun. And in that scene at that time, helping me was Martin Landau, playing his character on that. And as I looked at her and said farewell, I looked at him, and he's crying a ton. I said, "What are you doing? It's my girl." He said, "You're my friend. I love you. I'm sorry. I feel bad for you." "No, that's nice." Yeah. And we've talked about that. He said, "You were my friend. I cried for you." Well, we saw a number of shows that followed our pattern, that frankly, imitated us. Remember being furious at the A-Team when it first came on. I said, they got these guys, they're all specialists in one thing or another, and George Peppard seems to come out of, and it was an updated A-Team. Charlie's Angels, hello. Boy, they even had John Forsythe doing the voiceover, telling the girls what to do, and saying, "Don't wear a bra." But yeah, no, we've always watched television and been interested in what tacks are being taken. There's not a whole lot new under the sun, but when you find the right thing with the right people and do it well, it's attractive. We did do that reprise of the show in the late 80s and went down to Australia to do it. ABC had wanted it then, where it had been at CBS, and Paramount wanted that very much, but there was a writer's strike that year of '88, I think it was, and so they said, by golly, we'll go down to Australia and film it using Australian writers, and that way we don't get mixed up here. And so we did that, and about the time that we got down there and organized and started shooting, the writer's strike was over here, of course. But we got 2 good seasons down there, and it was wonderful visiting and being a part of Australia again, and seeing old friends and giving a different look to television that people probably hadn't seen before. I've been very fortunate in being able to do some good things and a lot of different kinds of things. Really what a whole lot of actors would like to be able to do. And I'm still now at this advanced age capable of performing some stuff and enjoy doing it. I think my brother is pretty well adjusted. And if he is not at the moment, he sure taught a lot of people for 20 years how to be well adjusted on Gunsmoke. But it's an adventurous business, and if you can, boy, an actress that I met somewhere recently in the last few months somewhere said, Peter, how do you keep reinventing yourself? I had never thought of it that way. But I started in motion pictures, and I did some of the science fiction stuff, and yet I was able to do things like Stalag 17 and then turn around and do Airplane a little bit later and do a Mission Impossible or a Fury or be the genial host on a show called Biography for 10, 15 years. It's a lot of different kind of things to do, and boy, what a treat for an actor that is. Well, I suppose that doesn't hurt, but I mean, you will never forget Sidney Greenstreet, nor Peter Lorre's voices, nor Bogart, nor I used to get, when I was first trying to get work, I'd go into studios and they would say, well, no, you're obviously a character actor, and we're looking for a leading man. Sorry, goodbye. And it used to make me so mad because I would say to them, tell me what Humphrey Bogart is. Is he what you would call a leading man, or is he, a character? Oh, well, yeah, but that's Bogart, see. How about Gable? Yeah, okay. So finally, somebody thought they discovered that I could be a leading man and gave me such a part, and now we're able to get back into the character thing a bit. Well, the whole story of that film is marvelous, and it was good. It was good, funny stuff for me because I was so unsure about it. I was unsure about accepting it because I had been playing these iron ramrod-spined guys a lot. Jim Newton of Fury, that outstanding, honest, upstanding rancher, or that super spy, Jim Phelps in Mission Impossible and that kind of stuff. And here they're asking me to do something where I ask a little boy some funny questions. And I thought, holy smoke, this could end a nice career, And I hesitated about it and went in and met the boys, the Zukers and Jim Abrams, and they told me what they were looking for, and I said, yeah, okay. And with fingers crossed, I said, sure, of course. And it turned out well. With Leslie, it was marvelous because Leslie for years had played heavies or mayors or governors or bankers or bad guys, good guys, whatever, but he never had a chance to play the kind of comedy that he is so capable of. And I heard him say to Bob Costas on a show that we did, I said to my agent, when I read the script, I said to the agent, whatever you do, don't lose this. Argue about the money and get the best you can, but don't lose this part. This is mine. And he was so right, because he was absolutely marvelous, and it opened up his career, and he's been playing that same guy for a number of years now and doing beautifully at it. Yeah, it was a great thing for both of us. Oh, geez, I don't know. That's not for me to say. I would say I have had a great life, a good career. I have been married now to the same girl for 59 years, and we've got our children and grandchildren and a whole separate life from the screen. But I feel that I have been, in both of those things, immensely fortunate.